session, so if there's anything you need, please just let me know. I have a couple of things to share before we get started. I want to give a big shout out to those of you who are attending the session online. Be sure to post your questions for our speakers in the chat, and we'll receive them and pass them along. For our guests in person, you'll see that there's a mic in the center of the room there. So once we get to about 15 minutes before the session ends, you can line up at the mic to ask your questions in person. This session is worth 1 hour of CE credit. If you're interested in receiving continuing education credits, visit the CEs through the NASW VA tab on our conference app or virtual platform. After the session, please make sure to complete the session evaluation form. It's listed in the session description. I think it's a SurveyMonkey link. And don't forget to post on social media. Use hashtag MHAConf22 and tag @MentalHealthAmerica. And lastly, we know some content can be triggering, so make sure to take care of yourself. If you need to log off for a second or step out, feel free to do so. If you are in person, we do have a wellness room on the second floor of the North Tower, Yellowstone Everglades. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce all of our wonderful presenters today. So we have Cecilia McGow is a New York City-based mental health activist, nonprofit executive director, consultant, and former radio astronomer. McGow is autistic who happens to also have schizophrenia but does not let her diagnoses define her. McGow is the founder and executive director of the global nonprofit Students with Psychosis. Emeka Chima is from the state of Maryland. He's an undergrad studying for his bachelor degrees in information systems management at the University of Maryland Global Campus. Through Students with Psychosis, he has become a mental health advocate and continues to divulge his story and lived experience with his condition. Shira Gum is a mental health advocate, student, teacher, trumpeter, and scientist. She is the president of the executive board of Students with Psychosis. Shira has lived with several mental illnesses her entire life, with diagnoses of schizoaffective disorder, borderline personality disorder, anorexia, PTSD, anxiety disorders, and a learning difference. And Dominique is from the Philadelphia area. She is a Pennsylvania State University grad and obtained her master's from the Indiana University of Pennsylvania in Health Services Administration. She wholeheartedly believes in embracing yourself and discovering or unmasking different parts of yourself that negative influencers have buried, sort of like relearning. And finally, we have Laura Kodowski. Miss Laura is from New York and has received her AA in Liberal Arts, BA in History, and MS in Library and Information Science while living with psychosis. She has experience working in human services and currently works in a public library. Laura likes taking pictures outdoors because she finds many parallels in nature with mental health awareness. So give a warm welcome to our presenters.
Welcome to the breakout session, College Experience Living with Psychosis. And I'm very happy to be here with fellow Students with Psychosis members as they were introduced. First going to be kicking off, we'll be hearing from our president of our executive board, Shira Agam, with their lived experience perspective. Shira, take it away.
Hi, my name is Shira Agam, and I live in Vancouver. I use she, her pronouns, and today I'm very excited to be sharing a little bit of my story with you. I am 4. I climb upstairs to go to sleep, but there are skeletons everywhere. My parents say I have a big imagination. Later, I'm laying in bed. I've just woken up and it's the middle of the night. I feel a snake wrapping its long, scaly body around my leg. I know if I move it will bite me, so I try to stay perfectly still. It bites me anyway. I scream. I am 5. I am in the backseat of the car, sobbing. I can't control myself. I have too much love and sadness for everyone and everything in the world. The light posts swish by outside the window, and I cry harder because I love them so much. I cry for all the people in jail who are trapped. I think of all the animals who are the last of their species, and I cry because I feel their loneliness and their pain. I have these crying fits all of the time, and then I'm laughing and I'm happy and there's nothing to see here. I am 6. I'm the skinniest one at school. Everyone tells me so, complimenting me for my smallness. I smile, soaking up the praise. I check my wrist whenever I remember to, making sure that it's still small, that I'm still the thinnest. In the mirror, I admire my sharp bones that stick through my skin, but it's never enough. I need them to pierce through completely before I'm satisfied. I pretend I'm not hungry until I lose my hunger cues. I decide I'm not human, therefore, I don't need food. I am 7. I can't remember the last time I was happy. Headaches and nausea consume me. I feel dull, disinterested. Sleep is my only refuge. I often feel as if I'm having a heart attack, though I know that's impossible. I'm in class taking a test, and I scream as I feel my heart about to give out. I am 8. I pretend I'm real, but I'm not. Nothing is, and it terrifies me. I float up and out of my body all of the time, watching myself from far away. I tell my friend, and she says I need God to save me. I pray and pray for God to make me real. He doesn't listen. I am 11. I hear the words mental illness for the first time, even though I have been experiencing all sorts of symptoms my entire life. Everything from anxiety to extreme moods, psychosis, and dissociation. I never once thought of reaching out for help. I didn't always even know something was wrong, and when I did, I didn't have the words to describe what I was experiencing. I am 13. My moods flip between extremes from minute to minute. I'm on top of the world, a god. Then I'm crying and thinking of how I can die. Then I'm screaming at everyone in the room, dizzy with rage, and then I'm laughing again. I'm eating so little that I have seizures. I hallucinate ants crawling under my skin, in my brain. I am 18. I am more disconnected from reality than ever. I've been hiding under my desk for days, waiting to be punished, sure that I've killed people. In the back of a police car, I'm laughing hysterically, on my way to the psych ward yet again, texting everyone that I know that I'm getting married, completely unaware of where I am. I am 20. For the first time in my life, I decide to take treatment seriously. It's the hardest thing that I've ever done, and I'm getting better, but I still feel so alone. There are only a few people I trust to talk to about what I'm going through, and they don't understand. I am 21. I find students with psychosis and join as a student leader. For the first time, I don't feel so alone anymore. It wasn't until I found this community that being open about my mental health had ever even occurred to me. But once I saw it was possible, I knew that's what I wanted. I wasn't ready yet, though. I wasn't even comfortable with sharing my name at the time. I am 22. I become president of the executive board of Students with Psychosis and talk publicly about my mental health to thousands of people. It took a long time, and it wasn't easy, but one day I decided enough was enough. I didn't have the energy to hide my struggles from the world anymore. I opened up, and it changed my life. Today, I am managing my symptoms better than ever. I am doing things that no one would have believed a few years ago. I advocate because I want people to know that they are not alone. I advocate because I want people to have words for their experiences. I advocate because I don't want people to feel like they need to hide from the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shira, for sharing your experiences with us. And thank you for your leadership behind the scenes with students with psychosis. Next up, we'll be hearing from Dominique, our internship coordinator.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dominique, and I currently reside in Norristown, PA. My preferred pronouns are she and her. I recently graduated from IUP with a Master's in Health Services Administration and obtained my Bachelor's in Psychology from Penn State. I am enrolling into an MPH program in the fall in Philadelphia. I currently work in pharmaceuticals where I help projects progress product market research. A little bit about my journey. I have been a member of Students with Psychosis for a year plus. I was diagnosed with psychosis in 2017, and at the time, I didn't know or understand what it was. I just trusted the doctors. Luckily, through treatment, therapy, and medication, I was able to complete graduate school while working multiple part-time jobs and volunteering. I was highly functional. But I had deep, deep feelings of never being included, understood, or seen or heard. I was particularly afraid of sharing my experiences during therapy because of the severe stigma of psychosis, the lack of experience with professionals due to underrepresentation and undereducation. So I kept a lot of my delusions to myself. Then I took matters into my own hands and began researching online about schizophrenia and success stories. I came across Cecilia's TED Talk, and at the time I was very moved. So I looked deeper and learned that she had created a nonprofit called Students with Psychosis. I thought that this was the perfect opportunity for me, and this is where my social recovery began. I applied and got hired as an intern, and at the time, I did not know how I would be impacted by this organization through my healing, recovery, and community. Initially, I wasn't seeking to advocate. I was looking for more of a mental health community. But further, I would see I would be challenged to use my voice, something that I suppressed for quite some time and for so long. I am proud that I made the decision to volunteer at SWP because the community is so bright, even though severe illness seems very dark in the media. But it is not, and we are full of light. I found hope, empowerment, skill set leadership, and a voice. And now I currently serve as an internship coordinator. The programs we offer here at SWP are 100% powered by those with lived experience. We particularly cater to the student population because by average, psychosis appears during the onset of adulthood, upon the age of 24, and this lies during the college years. My first onset of psychosis was during college as well. We support fellow peers and students to continue their endeavors and empower them to advocate for themselves in either academia or the workplace. We fulfill these needs by stimulating discussion around worldwide intersectional issues and offer peer support to inspire students to keep going despite their condition. We offer programs for peers and advocates and allies, which is both in person and virtually. Thank you for letting us share our insight and perspective, and I hope that you gain something from this session.
Thank you so much, Dominique, for sharing. And let me just say, when you joined as an intern and then became our intern coordinator, you are such a powerhouse behind the scenes. So again, thank you, Dominique. All right, next up, we have Emeka Shima. Emeka is our secretary on our executive board. And let me just say, I met Emeka for the first time virtually throughout the pandemic. And I looked up to Emeka before before meeting them in person. But let me just say, I'm looking up to them in like a different way. You're pretty tall, Emeka.
Thank you. Thank you, Cecilia. I know I'm relatively tall, but I didn't know I was that tall. So yes. Hello. People who know me, they know that I'm very soft-spoken, so this is probably the loudest I'll speak ever in my life. Hello, my name is Emeka Chima. My preferred pronouns are he, him, and I live in Gaithersburg, a center of widespread ethnic and economic diversity. I'm graduating at the University of Maryland Global Campus this August, attaining my bachelor's degree in Information Systems Management. How would you respond if you were told that you had a family history of severe mental illness? For me, I was surprised, but later on, I became inquisitive and determined to know more. I thought my immediate family lived a normal lifestyle until I delved deeper into the matter. Apparently, my late grandfather and one of my aunts were both diagnosed with bipolar disorder, which, according to the site MedicineNet, is categorized as one of the top 10 mental health issues and illnesses on the same list as anxiety disorders, mood disorders, as well as schizophrenia. I've always wondered what my future would look like when harboring a mental illness of my own. Around the time period, I was informed that I resembled symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia at age 15 to 16. This segued into depression, and it was confirmed that I was on the psychosis spectrum. Being diagnosed as a teenager at the time, with a bright future ahead, could have been my inevitable downfall, but instead transformed me. It became an eye-opening experience before transitioning into the real world. Some may deliberate how psychosis affects people on the spectrum. I can only speak in terms of my own personal, lived experience. Like other depression patients, I incurred negative symptoms as it is common to feel hopelessness, guilt, irritability, and restlessness. To a greater extent, these only touched the surface of what I was dealing with. Schizophrenia added another layer of altered consciousness, and soon enough my behavior and deep inner feelings became scattered, and I started to perceive thoughts and voices and visions that were bizarre and quite confounding. These allowed me to reflect on my personal life and this continuous search for identity. So, a little bit of background about me. I consider myself a Black, indigenous person of color, raised by a Nigerian father and a mother native to Washington, D.C. I sometimes ponder over my unique background. Every time I confront barriers in my mental health, I trace my awareness back to my family history of severe mental illness and deem myself in a fortunate situation. Unlike my close relatives who did suffer in silence, I now had the freedom to look at their past and secure a present and future road to recovery. So, the year 2020 was fraught with irrational fear and an overwhelming sense of self-affliction due to the magnitude of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has far exceeded my normal expectations. I personally found myself increasingly aware of my mental health and the long journey it took to reach this point in my recovery. I witnessed flashbacks of my younger self, who was diagnosed under the autism spectrum at an early age. I thought the worst had passed and could not be worsened in any other way. At the time, there was isolation and new changes to my support system. There were treatment options that saved my life and others that did little to benefit me. Now I can see that Students with Psychosis is my place. April 2020 was quite a milestone. It was the first time that nonprofit SWP experienced its population increase by 40%. This was when I became more immersed in the organization and became its executive board member under the title secretary. This introduced new learning experiences, network opportunities, and meaningful interactions, most notably the SIRS conference in Florence, Italy this April. Our hope is to foster an organization based on centralized, personalized community building with a safe space to develop new, close, intimate relationships and attend in-person and virtually held events. Thank you for listening to my story.
Thank you so much, Emeka. Very powerful testimony. Next up, we have Laura. Laura is our VP Management on our executive board. And let me just say, I can't wait for you all to hear Laura's story. Laura, take it away.
Hello, I'm Laura. I'm from New York, and my pronouns are she and her. I have an Associates of Arts in Liberal Arts from Nassau Community College, a Bachelor's of Arts in History from SUNY Westbury, and a Master's of Science in Library and Information Science from SUNY Albany. I'm currently serving as VP Management on the Executive Board at Students with Psychosis, and I'm also a library aide in a public library. I'll be talking a little bit about accessibility and inclusivity in the workplace at SWP and how I got started there. My experience with Students with Psychosis started when I applied to be a student leader and advocate as I was finishing graduate school. It was a great way to end my program while receiving a master's in science that SWP recognized at my virtual graduation party with them in 2020. Since my original graduation was canceled because of the pandemic, it was so nice to have an official graduation celebration with fellow graduates, peers, and advocates. Upon graduating, I found it difficult finding any library jobs since it was the pandemic and I was struggling at interviewing because of paranoia and social anxiety. I continued working part-time in human services because it was a flexible job while I was attending school. Helping people with disabilities and the elderly as an essential worker demonstrated that my psychosis has strengths of empathy, understanding, and resiliency in the workforce. Eventually, when things started to pick up again from COVID and I developed my skills further on interviews, I obtained a part-time job in a public library as a library aide behind the reference desk. How Students with Psychosis models its workplace is how I would like to see my own personal work environment operate. A job that reflects its ethics and morale of inclusivity and accessibility creates less symptoms while at work. Having coping skills so I can function on a professional level is important so I can fulfill the job requirements. I pursued working in libraries because they are safe spaces for me, and SWP reflects that in their workspace too. There is an emphasis not to put all the workload on one person, but rather we use everyone involved to participate and problem solve, so this creates a team-based atmosphere. SWP is accessible to students worldwide, serving a global audience and making it inclusive to people who live in Asia, Africa, North America, South America, Europe, and Australia and Oceania. Since Students with Psychosis connects with people around the world, it can reshape psychosis on a global scale. We are accommodating to student needs so they have the ability to participate in diverse programming if they want to. Whether or not someone is having a good or bad day shouldn't interfere with the person's daily activities, such as also attending school or work. The meetings are a place where we can share our highs and lows of the day to communicate more, which psychosis can prevent me doing. The organization teaches effective time management skills that can sometimes get lost because of the nature of the disorder. I have experienced the feelings of time being warped during psychosis that made it difficult to keep track of time. The schedule offers students a routine to follow and more structure in their lives if they feel they may need that because of their psychosis creating barriers to time management. We give valuable advice on coping mechanisms and how to obtain future goals while living with psychosis. I sometimes feel that because of the stigma of psychosis, I cannot pursue a goal of mine to work as an official librarian in the future. The feelings of shame, isolation, and also side effects from my medications cause obstacles for me. The organization has given me more confidence in the workplace because at SWP we can work together without judgment. I feel more comfortable around colleagues because of the social atmosphere SWP encourages its students to participate in. I believe this moral can coexist in outside work environments by bringing more advocacy and awareness into the workplace as employees with disabilities. As VP Management, I can better advocate for myself in a work setting like SWP. The role I'm in has prepared me to be in a leadership position that can be a requirement in many school and work settings. The collaboration and coordination on the executive board has formed many friendships amongst each other as peers and colleagues who all respect one another. The programming such as creative meetings allows me to showcase my creative works in photography and writing, which was inspired by students with psychosis and their advocacy. I use mental health themes in my creative works that help me process psychosis better and as a coping tool. I greatly appreciate that the organization brought out my artistic sides for self-expression. Thank you so much for your time and listening to my story.
Thank you so much, Laura, for sharing with us your story. And let me just say, it's been an extreme privilege watching, Laura, your growth throughout the years, both personally and professionally. It just seems like yesterday that we were all on that Zoom call celebrating your graduation in our 2020 SWP graduation. And it's been a privilege working alongside you. Before we go into discussion, I want to leave you off on one thought. Let's remember, when you create a mental health conscious environment, everyone wins. Let's not limit our world to neurotypical solutions. Otherwise, the solutions and priorities of our world will remain with a neurotypical bias. We see this bias today reflected in the results of high percentages of our psychosis community being present in the unemployment rate, homelessness rate, dropout rate, the attempt of suicide rate, and suicide rate. Empower people living with psychosis, and you will empower one of the most vulnerable and misunderstood communities, along with tackling some of the most prevalent world concerns of today. Give our community a voice. Next, we'll be going into a discussion with our panel. The first question that I have for our panel is, how has community connecting with fellow peers assisted in your recovery journey? We all know you can speak, we just heard you.
So to answer the question, how has community connecting with fellow peers assisted in my recovery journey? Well, for a start, community has been a valuable part of my life, and the intimate connection between peers holding similar experiences to my own has been also fulfilling to my recovery. I can relate to my friend group since we can lean on each other for support. Our backgrounds may be unique, but our day-to-day life struggles are mutual. There isn't a day when I won't receive a call or text from somebody in my support system as we exchange words or feelings of encouragement. Having an emotional kinship during times of isolation is just as impactful as the physical presence of a loved one in times of consoling. From my viewpoint, my personal recovery is a short-term goal, powered by hope and struggle. But collective recovery is more fulfilling. Collective recovery is when we face our strengths and weaknesses together as a single unit, not only praising our own abilities, but accepting the help of others when in need.
Thank you, Emeka. Our next question is, how can community building be more accessible? Take it away, Shira.
Yeah, I think community building in the mental health realm can be much more accessible, and I think this starts with earlier intervention. And so this can be education on warning signs and symptoms in grade school, for example. As I said earlier, I had no idea what I was experiencing until things were more severe, and that was really scary. I didn't know that I should reach out for help, and my symptoms were just getting worse. Another thing that I think would be really helpful, and that ties into that last point, is mental health check-ins. So a mental health check-in for a younger student or a younger person would be really helpful because it takes some of the burden off of them for having to reach out for help. It also provides a space for them to learn more about what they may be experiencing, even if that's just healthy emotions, or if it's symptoms of mental illness early on. I could have disrupted the downward progression of my mental health. I could have learned language for what I was experiencing, and I could have known that I wasn't alone, and with that I could have learned tools to manage my symptoms, which then ties into my third point here, which is that I think education on coping tools is really important. Because I have spent countless hours in therapy and groups learning coping skills that work for me, and that's such a privilege that not everybody has. Everybody can benefit from learning tools that will help them in times of stress and distress, because everybody experiences those times. You don't need to be ill for a coping toolkit to be helpful, and especially for children, this can be really helpful. So I think that this education on warning signs and symptoms, mental health check-ins, and education on coping tools can really help with community building within the realm of mental health, because it starts providing those fundamental building blocks for children to understand, reach out, communicate with each other, and learn more about their own health. But I'll pass the mic if anybody else wants to answer.
Just to kind of add on to what Shira was saying about education, I think that those in like leadership positions or corporate organizations and professors in college clubs and grade schools should reinforce the idea of talking about mental health. If they're talking about it, then people will feel more comfortable to talk about it too, because they are at the forefront of what our society, how it is. So education from like authority figures and organizations, I believe would really help to create community and create conversation around mental health. And also implementing like mental health into physical examinations, requiring that students who are in grade school to take mental health assessments with their physical examinations. Also creating mental health clubs, and of course, mental health policy would really help as well.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and thoughts when it comes to community building and accessibility. Our next question is, if you are a person living with psychosis who also falls within an intersecting community, what are some additional perspectives, barriers, or hurdles you have experienced related to that intersection?
I can speak first on this, and as I was introduced, I have some comorbidities with my mental health, and this has created a lot of barriers for me. For example, when I wanted to go to treatment for my eating disorder, it was a requirement that I participate in DBT therapy, and when I went to participate in DBT therapy, they didn't want to take me because of my psychosis, because they thought I would be too distracted. So there was a lot of barriers to being able to access the treatment I needed for these different intersections of my mental health.
Also speaking on when it comes to different intersections, from my personal lived experience as someone living with schizophrenia and within the LGBTQ plus community, I know that when I first opened up about my schizophrenia, it was also around the same time that I opened up about being pansexual and gender fluid. And I remember that the people around me, particularly my family, discredited me opening up about my being part of the LGBTQ plus community as just a part of my psychosis. I also want to talk a little bit about some of that internal stigma and barriers that I struggled with. Because when you live with a diagnosis that makes you question reality every single day, that's going to also add an additional layer there when it comes to when you're questioning sexuality and questioning gender, because you are struggling with wondering if your own thoughts are valid. But with that said, being part of the LGBTQ plus community isn't a mental illness. Do any other of our panelists want to talk about intersections and psychosis and how it has impacted them? What are some things that we can perhaps learn from other intersecting communities? What can the psychosis community learn from intersecting community members?
So I mentioned that I'm part of the BIPOC community, Black, Indigenous, Person of Color. I think people can learn a lot from people in that community. They can learn how not to judge a book by its cover, and that everybody has their own experience. The question is, how will you live it? How will you extend it towards other people? And how will you benefit the world through your identity?
I wanted to mention that, of course, we know that marginalized communities are underrepresented when it comes to mental health. So having resources in underrepresented, disadvantaged communities would really help bridge the gap when it comes to those who are undiagnosed. Because I know that with health insurance, a lot of underrepresented communities don't have health insurance because it is very expensive, and of course mental health services is very expensive too. So just keeping that in mind when creating policies around mental health and healthcare would really help to bridge some of those gaps.
Thank you, panelists, for sharing your perspectives. Going on to our next question, have different aspects of your personal experience identity impacted your ability to access accommodations?
I can speak a little bit about this because my family really impacted my willingness to get accommodations. My father is a professor, and he always talked about how people were faking illnesses for extensions and this and that. And so when I found out that I was eligible for accommodations, I didn't use them. When I was in high school, I had read this book, a memoir, Madness, A Bipolar Life by Maria Hornbacher. And I remember telling my parents about it and how she had a husband, and their reaction was something that I will never be able to forget, because they said, who would ever love someone with a severe mental illness? They didn't know that I was already really struggling with my mental health. And so this really factored into me not telling anybody about my diagnoses until much later on, and feeling really lonely because of that, and not accepting accommodations again. Sorry to go back to the question, because I didn't want to tell anybody what I was struggling with. I didn't want to be someone who couldn't be loved. So my family really contributed to that.
Thank you so much for sharing. Moving on to our next question. What are the systemic forces, obstacles that prevent people from getting accommodations? Sort of adding on to this discussion when it comes to accommodations, whether in the workplace or in a school atmosphere.
Yeah, well, we're living in a world where stigma is universal. Yeah, like in the academia setting, one of the systemic forces that may prevent people from getting accommodations is a lack of motivation, especially when it comes to asking for help. Like, not many people want to feel like the other. They want to be like part of the social norm, but it's okay to ask for accommodations. It won't put a dent on your record. It's normal. So don't let the forces impede you from getting what you want.
Yeah, and adding on to that conversation, I know for me personally, I struggled with a lot of internal ableism when I first entered university on even asking for accommodations. I know for me, I had difficulty admitting that I needed help and knowing that it was okay. Just like how Mecca was saying, no one wants to feel othered. For me, I think that it's important that we have classroom environments that are not only supportive but empowering to people living with mental illness, mental health conditions, because if we create an atmosphere that it is welcoming for someone living with a diagnosis, and you don't have to ask for an accommodations because, again, that asking is already a barrier in itself. But moving on to our next question. So on a little bit more of a positive note, what is an accommodation that you have benefited from but have seen underutilized at your school or workplace?
So for me, an accommodation that I really needed at one point was a memory aid for taking tests. At that time in my life, my memory was to the point where I was getting lost in my own house that I had lived in for years because my memory was just not there. And I really shouldn't have been taking classes, but I was. And so a memory aid would have been something really helpful, but there was a really big barrier to getting that. They wanted me to take several examinations about my memory, and it was too much for me at the time. I wasn't well. So that's an accommodation that has helped me when I've had it, but when I didn't have it, it was not helpful, obviously.
Yeah, the accommodation I greatly utilized while in school was having approved extensions on my written assignments. Since I generally would work slower than the average student and it took me longer to process information, this helped me complete my assignments and not get overwhelmed. Just seeing that I had more time in my planner to get my work done was a big stress reducer and beneficial because I could manage everything easier. When you add school to your schedule while you're also trying to manage work and a treatment plan for psychosis, it can get to be a lot. But because of my accommodations, it made it more achievable.
Thank you for our panelists for sharing. We got one more question, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A. The question is, how can we transform academic and workplace environments to be more accepting and empowering for people living with psychosis?
I think that one of the first things that we can do is what Dominique had said, and that's opening up the conversation about mental health and feeling safe to share about your mental health. Working with SWP is such an accommodating work environment because everybody's open about their mental health. If you need extra time, if you need another person on the project, it's not a problem. And we have that open communication that allows us to actually move forward and get things done despite our struggles with mental health. And I think that more places that model this workplace environment, the more people it will benefit and the more it will catch on to other places.
Yeah, what makes a good workplace? What makes a good team? The answer to that is morale. Employees, students, they need the extra motivation to succeed in whatever endeavor they choose. They need empowerment and acceptance through shared decision making, leadership training, and all the above. So, yeah, morale is a universal concept when it comes to academia and in the workplace.
I think having an open dialogue about mental health in school or the workplace can help normalize psychosis. Starting a conversation around psychosis, whether personal, educational, or professional, can normalize mental health issues. When I'm having a conversation about mental health at work, I begin to feel empowered, which gives me more confidence doing my job. I think my lived experience with psychosis has strengths of empathy, understanding, and resilience in the workforce. It's not all bad having schizophrenia. It's just that our neurodivergent minds think a little differently from everyone else, which people may not accept, especially in a work environment. Discussing mental health topics at school or work and talking about how we're feeling or how our day is going can transform workspaces into more accepting environments for every type of employee.
And adding on to that, I think that's something that Students with Psychosis is doing, is modeling a workplace environment where we have team members living openly with their diagnosis of schizophrenia, psychosis. And I want to challenge you all today, when you hear the word that someone has psychosis or schizophrenia, do you think of leadership? Do you think of a team working together? And I think that's something that SWP is doing towards changing that image of what people think of when they think of people living with psychosis, because we can work together effectively as a team and display leadership skills. So with that said, we're now going to go ahead and open up for Q&A. So there's a mic in the middle of the room.
First of all, I have to say, the 5 of you are kick-ass. I mean, the courage to get up and speak your truth in front of a group of strangers is incredibly empowering to me. I don't know if it is for you, but I feel so energized. But what I'm hearing from you and about you is tremendous. So I want you to know that. I mean, I appreciate the fact that you are putting it out there. And I had kind of a thought about how much energy, and this is for all of you, how much energy did you have to expend hiding your secret? And for how long? And what was it that kind of like clicked in your brain and said, I gotta let go of this? I mean, because we talk about trauma, you've all lived trauma. That's kind of the theme through all of this. The fact that you had to go through all of the hiding and the subterfuge and making up stories had to be just incredibly debilitating, on top of having the challenges that you talked about. So I just wondered if you had some thoughts about what it was like for you to expend all that energy. And like I said, you guys kick ass.
First, I want to say thank you so much for those kind words there, and I very much resonate with what you said. I know for me, when I was studying my first semester, my first year at university, I wasn't open about my diagnosis. And honestly, I felt like I was jumping through hurdles trying to keep it a secret. I would pack my bag and go to my class, even when I was taking a mental health leave, because I didn't want my fellow students or roommates to know. And when it came to finally opening up about my schizophrenia, it did feel like finally a pile of bricks off of my shoulders. But with that said, when I chose to, I didn't really get to choose when I opened up about my schizophrenia. Let me sort of set up the scene a bit. So one night, the night before, I was struggling with my schizophrenia, and I ended up admitting myself into the ER. And I stayed there overnight, and I returned back to my dorm room at Penn State to my 3 roommates and the RA, the residential assistant, and also a can't help person. We all talked, and they heard the word schizophrenia, and they decided that I needed to have another psych ward stay. And let me say, I was in no way refusing to go. I have no past history of violence. Actually, I used to live in a homeless abuse shelter for part of high school. So what happened next was really inexcusable. They brought police officers into my dorm room in full uniform. They patted me down, and I had to convince them not to put handcuffs on me. And this was in front of my roommates. And then they escorted me into a marked police car, right outside of our dining commons, where friends were passing by and seeing me put into a police car. So by the time I came back, the cat was out of the bag, and then I had to set the story straight. So even as much as it was relieving to finally be open about my schizophrenia, I'm infuriated that I did not get the choice of how, when, and if I wanted to be open about my diagnosis. So I wanted to add that to the conversation, but we're going to open it up now to the panel.
I've had similar experiences to Cecilia where, people found out through police coming and all of that. But when you first asked the question, what I really thought of was when my parents first found out. And I didn't tell them, but they hadn't heard from me in a while, so they started calling random hospitals, and the hospital told them where I was. And I remember my mom flew out to come see me, and that was the most stress I've ever been under before she arrived. When she was sitting in the waiting room, I was very, very distressed. It was a lot of energy, like you said, keeping it a secret all the time, and then when the moment came, it was awful, and it was a lot of energy. I was so exhausted.
So shortly after diagnosis, I've suppressed my illness most of my high school and college life. What made me change my perspective, my view, is being struggling in the open. Like my symptoms became so prevalent and so transparent that I couldn't hide it no longer. Before, I was saying nobody can know, but now it's like if somebody knows, then the hiding is over. No more need to run away from my situation, because you can't control your illness, but you can control your response to the illness. So I think that it's okay to be open and transparent, especially when you've been hiding for so long. You just need to shed more light, and find your space.
Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing their stories with that. And I just wanted to add one more thing, that also when it comes to talking about being open about a diagnosis, it doesn't have to be one or the other. You don't owe anyone your story. And also, if you want to be open about your diagnosis, it doesn't mean you have to tell everyone. So even in itself, when it comes to being open about your diagnosis, there's a spectrum. We're going to go ahead back to our Q&A.
Hi, I really wanted to thank you, Shira, for sharing that sentiment about what you did about your parents' reaction to finding that book. That really resonated with me as someone who was a teenager when they were diagnosed with bipolar disorder. My question is, do you have any advice on how to combat these like societal expectations that people put on you, or this whole idea that once they find out that you have a mental illness, they kind of expect you to act in a certain way, or are surprised when you don't act in a certain way? And I was just wondering if you had any advice on how to like combat that and tune out those expectations of other people. Thank you.
Yeah, my answer for that is community. Finding individuals with your similar diagnosis is what I found very helpful when it came to worrying about what my peers were thinking. Well, if I have like peers such as people living with psychosis, or also allies as well, that made such a huge difference. Also, I found it as a very good filter. When I started opening up about my schizophrenia, I realized that the people who, weren't going to be my friend anymore because of my schizophrenia, well, do I really want them as my friend? But I'm going to pass this on to the panel. Does anyone else have anything to add when it comes to combating societal's expectation on us?
I've had a lot of trouble with friends in the past as well. When I open up, or when I don't open up, and then I'm struggling, and they see that, and it's something that I'm still working on, to be honest. Yeah, it's sorry, it's a difficult thing, but I think something that really helps me is putting, kind of what Cecilia said, some space between people who are treating you differently or treating you poorly, and that doesn't mean that you can't ever be friends again, and that's something I had to learn, but just maybe taking a pause, and it can be healthy for the both of you, because it can be very stressful for the other person too, so, yeah.
And then bringing this to a larger scale when it talks about like societal expectation, thinking about the workplace, for example. I know for me, as someone living with schizophrenia and autism, when I approach work, I approach it maybe a little bit differently than my neurotypical peers. So when it comes to the workplace environment, it's important that we are accommodating, and also knowing that we all benefit when we bring neurodiversity to the table. I'm someone who experiences hallucinations every single day, and I honestly think that it has impacted my problem, in a positive way, my problem-solving skills, because again, if you have to question whether something's real or not, well, that's going to make you think about and see the world a little bit differently, and those perspectives are important in the workplace as well. We have another question.
I wanted to echo the others saying thank you so much for sharing your stories. And my question was, one of the big themes was like kind of normalizing, discussing mental health in the open. And it seems like over the past year, even for like people currently in middle school and high school, it seems like there is quite a lot more openness, potentially, like a million TikTok videos about mental health, and YouTubers and Discord channels. I was curious to get your perspectives about how you see that changing, and kind of like the future of the organization, given the like rapidly changing discussion.
Hell yeah, I'm loving seeing when it comes to the change and the acceptance that's around mental health. With that said, though, I want to also add that even sometimes within the mental health community, schizophrenia, psychosis gets shied away from. So I do want to put some light on that. But even within I've been open about my schizophrenia since 2016, 2015, so it's been a while. But even in that short time, I remember going onto the internet and just trying to find other people living with schizophrenia and psychosis, and maybe finding 1 or 2 advocates out there. But now you go on to social media, you see so many more people open about it. And in a world where there's a lot going on, that's something that I hold on to when I think of hope. And also why I love working with students so much. They teach me a lot every single day. But going back to our panel, what are all your thoughts when it comes to the increase of awareness? Do you think that mental health is being talked about more? And how do you see that in your personal lives or on social media?
I see that we're at the end of time, but I think that it's going to be really great for our organization because when I was first diagnosed, I felt really alone, like I've said, and the first thing I did was I was Googling like psychosis, schizophrenia, and I found students with psychosis. And I think the more that people have these conversations, the more that it helps the younger generation to be able to open up and to be able to find these resources like our community.
Thank you.